Great. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our first ever Share and Learn session. We've called this one Learning from the Life Chances Fund Project, Impact and Ways Forward. We are so delighted to have you here in the room with us, and those of you who are joining us online, you are all so welcome. I have a wonderful team of colleagues who will be keeping an eye on questions, so we'll stop for Q&A, but if you're online in the chat, do pop questions, thoughts, comments as we go. And when we stop for Q&A in the room, raise your hand and we'll try and come to you. For those of you who don't know me, I assume you probably have all heard me by now, but my name's Jess Reedy. I am Senior Policy Engagement Officer here at the GoLab. And one of the key things that I'm responsible for is being able to translate our academic work and making sure it is translating into useful practical lessons that people are able to engage with, that are able to understand. And so this session feels like it really captures the heart of what I love doing. We're getting to hear about real life projects that we at the GoLab have been studying and doing lots of knowledge learning around. But we're being able to join with you all today, getting to hear directly from these projects, hear about their learnings, about what they felt went well, what they do differently, so that we can all go out and do better practice together. So without further ado, we're going to start with a little video because we promised a more dynamic session. It's only an hour than usual, and then we'll go into our introductions.
People in society who face
Might have to bear with us for 1 second. It's our first time doing a video in this.
It's worth the wait.
The Life Chances Fund helps people in society who face the most significant barriers to lead happy and productive lives. It is an innovative £70 million fund committed by central government and is one of the largest of its type in the world. Central and local government, private and public funders, social investors and civil society organisations all work together to solve complex social problems. 29 projects are providing a range of targeted local services across England. These cover a range of different social issues, such as homelessness, and supporting people with mental health conditions into work. In Nottinghamshire, Future Impact supports young people aged 15 to 24 with special educational needs to ultimately help them into sustainable employment or voluntary work.
I was dealing with a lot of issues. This made it difficult to leave the house. I became isolated. My anxiety got really bad. I wanted to study, but starting at college seemed impossible. Futures helped secure my place, get involved in different activities, meet new people. Now I can learn and make friends.
Hundreds of young people have been supported in taking positive steps in their education or towards sustainable employment. In Norfolk, the Stronger Families project works to keep families together and stop children going into care.
I would never have believed I would be sitting here writing this now. How different our life and relationship is due to the ideas, techniques and support received from Stronger Families.
Stronger Families Norfolk has averted more than 160,000 days in care for the children in the programme, with better home experiences and overall life chances for children and families who are able to stay together. Skillmill helps young people across the country to break the cycle of reoffending by employing them to work on environmental projects.
I got in with the wrong crowd and they forced me to steal from delivery vans. I was facing charges but was given the chance to go to Skillmill instead. I like helping the environment, so there are more things for people in the future to go and see. I'm learning new skills that will support me in getting a career. Without this project, I would have probably been locked up.
Skillmill has positively impacted young people's lives, bringing a sense of self-belief, confidence and pride in what they achieve. Building a wide range of strong, collaborative local partnerships means projects have been able to deliver person-centred, flexible support that changes lives. Social investors have offered extra expertise and support. This creates an effective partnership of government, investors and civil society organisations who all help achieve the best outcomes for people.
The LTF has allowed us to innovate over a number of years. This partnership is bold and has led to some really excellent outcomes.
The Life Chances Fund tracks the actual outcomes achieved, making sure that the money spent is tangibly helping more than 60,000 people to lead more productive and happy lives. The organisations involved are constantly learning about what works by evaluating the outcomes people achieve and the experiences of staff and service users, and using this information to continually improve their services. We're sharing our learnings publicly so that the innovations of the Life Chances Fund can continue to positively affect social outcomes, inspiring best practice both in the UK and internationally. Thank you to the Life Chances Fund project partners, service providers, commissioners and investors. To find out more about all 29 Life Chances Fund projects, plus data and evaluation findings, please visit www.gov.uk/guidance/social-outcomes-partnerships.
Lovely. Well, hopefully that gives you a little bit more of a holistic overview of the Life Chances Fund. I know you'll have been hearing about it already over all of our different sessions in the last day or so. But I don't want to hog the spotlight anymore. Let's begin with some introductions. I'd love if you could each take maybe about 5 minutes to introduce yourself and share a bit about your project and any key things you think the audience should know. Faye, let's begin with you.
Thank you. So I'm Faye Maloney. I'm a commissioning manager for Norfolk County Council. We've got this slide showing that our programme is the Stronger Families Partnership. This came about, goes back to 2019. Before that, Norfolk carried out a needs analysis. We identified, this predates me, so we identified that there were more young people going into care and they were staying in care for longer. As a result, Norfolk sought an innovative solution. We went out to market and the response that we got, where we landed, was on the Stronger Families Partnership. So that has 3 organisations involved who are represented, me sitting here, also in the room, we have colleagues from the partnership and online too. The programme, the service has been in place for 5 years. It has worked well, it has successful outcomes because I feel it has a clear shared aim, that of supporting Norfolk's children and families to stay at home. It also has just one single outcome measure that we all work towards. Over the 5 years, we've developed 5 ways of working, which, as you'll see, are core, they're a constant. It doesn't matter if the personalities change, but the ways of working remain. So we have a weekly team meeting, we have a monthly board meeting, we have an established referral pathway, we have an established way of raising awareness across the operational staff. Referrals come in from social workers all across Norfolk. It's one of the largest counties in England. So we have a way of making sure that the staff are aware of the service, how they can refer in, and which families would fit this service. Those approaches underpin the partnership. If we go to the next slide. Before we go to the next slide, sorry, I'm going to be a pain. Thank you. In that, we've got the 3 organisations represented. We've also got the Stronger Families logo itself. That one represents the service, but from my perspective, and I think for the rest of the partnership, it represents the families, the children, the young people that are involved. So with them in mind. Thank you. We have this as our outcome slide. We're up to 195,000 care days saved as that single outcomes measure. We've got 279 families that have consciously opted into this service, and it is the whole family that has to opt in. That's why I wanted to pop back to the other slide, because they are that 4th active, engaged, listening, learning partner, and if they don't buy in, we don't achieve the outcomes. On this slide, this is also a way that we keep track of that shared aim. It's presented and updated by our senior data analyst. It's presented in the monthly board meeting, which means we're all focused. There is very little opportunity in this contract and this delivery mechanism for any kind of mission drift. We go to the next slide. Okay, so we literally put a spotlight on the weekly meeting that we hold. That in itself represented some of the complexity that we work with. We worked together to put these slides together. We used that meeting space to turn up, which I think is sometimes the most important thing because it shows our commitment to this contract. We chat, we get to know each other as people, we get to understand our roles and responsibilities. We understand the background knowledge, the skills. We have an economic skill set in here, a philosophy skill, psychology skill set. We've got a management kind of underpinning. We've got the data, the scientific. All of that comes in. So we work together as a group with that dynamic that flexes over time to achieve, to deliver the shared aim. I started saying about the production for these slides, that involved complexity. Personally, I'll put my hand up. I brought some of that complexity to the conversation. But as a result of that, I personally got to learn. I got to learn about Vicky Reynolds as a psychology who puts forward different ideas about collective care. I did some reading up. I learned about her philosophy and approach of leaning in. And that's what we do in this meeting. We lean in. So we share the accountability, the responsibility. If somebody has a question, it's not just one person that answers. We discuss it to shape it. I'm going to pause for a moment. You have 2 quotes on that slide from other people in the partnership. And I'm not sure how long it takes to read those. So building up again. Legacy. Our legacy is that this is a sustainable project from Norfolk's point of view. We have committed to extending it for a further 3 years. Part of that decision making is around the data that we've shared with you. The outcomes are there. People are opting in and they are staying in to see it through. It's also because we've got the stability of the service delivery mechanism. This is working for Norfolk. And I believe, I hope it's not too much of a statement, I think it's working for the whole of the partnership. Possibly a good place for me to finish.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. It was wonderful to get to hear about those outcomes, but also some of the mechanisms that actually make it possible. And I guess the active participation of, okay, Andrea said this yesterday, it's not a great word, service users, but the people involved and that active leaning in makes all of the difference. Davey, let's go to you next. Do you want to introduce yourself and share a bit about your Life Chances Fund project?
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name's David Parks. I'm the founder and managing director for the Skill Mill, which has been in existence for just over 10 years. So before setting up the Skill Mill, I was the head of service at Newcastle Youth Justice Team. So a long career in managing multi-agency service for young people at risk of offending or involved in offending. So the Skill Mill is a social enterprise. We set it up as an experiment to test employment as an intervention to reduce the risk of reoffending. And we did that as a pilot in 2013, 14, with young people who were most at risk of reoffending. Not so much at risk of harm, but certainly there was a risk of reoffending, and we were looking at that cohort of young people targeting them. And the pilot was very successful, so much so that other youth offending teams had heard about what we were doing. Every local authority in England and Wales has a youth offending team. So it's quite a small network, and we share practice constantly. And so the Skill Mill idea sort of took off. So we had Skill Mills developing in other places, and growing in terms of the practice that we were developing around the employability or the job itself being an intervention to reduce reoffending. Round about 2016-17, we were introduced to the idea of a social impact bond, and that sounded very interesting to us. The idea or notion of being rewarded for reducing or rewarded for reducing cost to the state. So that for us was very important because it's not something we had really quantified. At that point, we're measuring a lot of things, but not how much money is it saving the state by keeping young people out of the system, especially keeping young people out of the secure estate. So we decided to go ahead, and we launched, we, over 3 years, developed the contract. That was very challenging because we had 10 local authorities to deal with. We had 4 investment organisations as well. We had also around about 50 private sector organisations who were buying a service. So our SIB differs from most SIBs in that the outcome payments make up 2/3 of the repayment of the capital investment, and 1/3 comes from the skill mill selling its service to customers. So it's quite unique from that point of view. It is also the only criminal justice SIB in the Life Chances Fund's portfolio. So when you see criminal justice, one, that's skill mill, right? So full disclosure, that's there. Second, I guess the second purely criminal justice focused SIB since Peterborough. We are, so we've finished delivery this March. Later we can go into the learnings around that, but essentially we have completed delivery. We're collecting the final outcomes. That will be done by the end of this month. So, you know, we'll be able to report fully on the program. The unfortunate situation at the end of the Life Chances Fund program was that we had nothing to replace LCF. So the local authority is quite keen, well, all keen to continue to pay for outcomes on the same basis as they were. Skill mill still generating sales revenue, but for most teams we have a big gap, which was left by the Life Chances Fund and central government not in a position to step in at that time. Timing was terrible for us because we were right in the middle of election time and blah, blah, blah. So we have had to stand down 80% of our provision. We've retained a core team, and we're now working on a plan to re-establish those teams and grow again, taking all the learning from the past 4 years, especially running this thing through the SIB, but also the last 10 years of delivering these services.
Thanks so much for that, Davey. It was really great to hear a little bit about the skill mill. And yeah, we know it's been a well-loved project, but it is so striking that even if it's a project that's been loved by a local authority or made a real difference to people's lives, this question of legacy and sustainability and transition is so core, and it has genuine consequences on living people. So I think that would be helpful maybe to delve into a little further along. Great. Next we go to Joe. Joe, do you want to introduce yourself and the project?
I can do, thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Joe. I'm from Allchild, formerly West London Zone. My comms director told me to stop saying the formerly West London Zone bit because apparently that's the mark of an unsuccessful rebrand. But I just can't. I can't help it, and I've said it now. So yeah, great to be here. This is my 8th year at Allchild. I led delivery for the first 4 years or so, and I sort of moved into a development role not that long ago. Just a little bit first of all about I suppose the genesis really of Allchild, formerly West London Zone. I mean, we started 2014-15, and the starting point was listening to the communities in North Hammersmith, the White City estate. We knew there was a group of children, we were told there was a group of children roughly about 1 in 5 who were in school, primary and secondary school, who were at real risk of exclusion, not being in school, requiring social care, mental health crisis. And actually, West London has lots of good schools. It has lots of good services, well-developed voluntary sector. So actually understanding the sort of systemic challenges, really, why did those children exist in the risks that they had? And actually, some of those challenges that we heard about, which helped to sort of, I suppose, help to co-design the model, were that, first of all, that these children and families had a multiplicity of risks and challenges. Actually, they were largely unknown to sort of children's services because they didn't have one thing that sort of triggered, if you like, something at a really serious level. But actually, they were behind at school, low attendance, low levels of social emotional well-being, maybe low levels of parental involvement at home, low, peer relationship problems, lots and lots of challenges across lots of different, I suppose, domains, really, education, voluntary sector, local authority / early help. But also some of the challenges were that even though there were good services in those communities, actually they told us they weren't actually getting to and engaging the children and families who most needed it, either by they weren't necessarily being the ones referred, or if they were referred, they weren't attending, because I suppose there was no focus on that engagement model. And so these things really sort of helped us to think about the model. And just very quickly, I mean, I'll say 2 things about our delivery model. One is that the impact program that we designed with the schools, local authorities, voluntary sector services who originally at the steering group participated. So impact program is a 2-year schools-based program in primary and secondary schools. We proactively find, using predictive data and school judgment, a cohort of children and families who are most at risk of those negative escalations I talked about earlier. We get a trusted relationship with them, got a school-based link worker full-time in every school. That's absolutely crucial backbone to the whole program. They get to know children and families really, really well. And actually getting to know them really helps to get that input into the personalised program that they're going to undertake for the next 2 years. But it also helps to drive the engagement model. When we've all had, people who we trust, I'm sure, in our lives who gives us advice and things, and actually referrals or links, as we call them, coming from that place of trust, our experience is that those people are then far more likely to engage with services that previously they may have been reticent to do so. So the final part of the impact program is the personalised plan that is co-designed, as I mentioned, and actually that's the bit where we partner with about 80 voluntary sector organisations in West London, local authority early help services as well. Some of them we micro-commission where there are gaps and barriers to access. Others we link to where they have community-based models. And these voluntary sector organisations deliver specialist interventions across that social, emotional, academic sort of range of domains I mentioned earlier. So that's the impact programme. The other feature I would say about the delivery model is the importance of place and partnership, really. So the specific delivery and outcomes mix, I suppose, is tailored by local authorities and the features and challenges and strengths, indeed, of each of the local authorities that we work in. And of course, the collection of delivery partners changes depending who is already active and trusted in those local authorities as well. The second thing about partnership is that the way that, in order for this to work, we really need these strong operational partnerships with voluntary sector organisations, local authority early help services, schools, of course. Actually, the strategic partnerships and financial partnerships we've managed to effect really helps to drive that. So schools are paying into this, local authorities are paying in, Obviously, the Life Chances Fund was a good chunk as well. And then we do a lot of private fundraising, local high net worth individuals, trusts and foundations and corporates. And really the Life Chances Fund, I suppose, acted as a vehicle to really incentivise those different systems, I suppose, to be paying in and pooling that funding. Final point on legacy, we're still in the boroughs that we're working in West London, so that's we're really pleased about that. Some really good sort of impact and testimony over the years. I believe it's on our poster somewhere, so I won't go through it now. But actually also, I mean, really important legacy, really catalysed by the Life Chances delivery. We've now started, which has been in the sort of co-design for the last 2 years, a translation of our model in communities in Wigan, in Greater Manchester. And I use that translation word really deliberately, picking up and dropping something from West London somewhere else, we knew wasn't going to work. And so we've taken the core features and then really tailored and co-designed that over 2 years with the key stakeholders in Wigan. So that's just starting now.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing, Joe. It was great to hear about that. Really interesting what you were saying about the Life Chances Fund actually being able to work as a vehicle for different parts of the system to be brought together and be made to lean in a bit more. Great. And then we have our final panelist who, as you can see, is not in the room with us, but is online. Ashley, can we go to you?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you great.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry I can't be with you today. I was hoping to be there. Just before I forget, my colleague Vinny is in the room and she will be at the poster stand later if anyone wants to pick up any details of anything that I talk through. So Think Forward is our organisation. I'm the CEO, and we have a mainstream programme, which is a coaching programme where coaches are based in schools. They're not sports coaches. The idea is that they support and create structure for a young person who might be vulnerable, who's already been identified as potentially being vulnerable to a safe and successful transition, either within school from year to year or post-school into something successful like an FE course or a job or an apprenticeship. So that's our main programme. It's called Future Me. It's a 5-year programme. And that attracted some attention from a commissioner who had personal experience of a young person in their family who had special educational needs. He was particularly passionate about the low employment rates for young people with SEND. I'm going to abbreviate it to SEND for the purposes of this presentation. So he was really passionate about trying to address low employment rates in that particular group. And he felt, certainly in the early stages, that our coaching programme might be a programme that could be adapted to essentially be delivered in special schools and actually support the transition of young people, SEND young people from education into employment. So that they were the kind of early ideas or early acorn of an idea that we started to develop. Interestingly, Joe, who you've just heard from, was involved in some of that early work, some of that thinking around programme design and so on. So Joe will have an intimate knowledge of the early stages of the development of this programme. In terms of how we hit upon the idea of funding, in the presentation this morning, one of the early presentations, there was a list of very early SIB projects. And for our mainstream programme, we were one of those 10 DWP programmes. So we had, as an organisation, as an institution, if you like, we had experience of the social impact bond structure. And therefore it felt fairly obvious and reasonably low risk, because we had a familiarity with it, that actually a SIB model might be the model whereby we test something out, we run it over 5 years, we do a proper evaluation, and then we work out whether or not that programme is going to work for that particular group of young people. So we hit upon the programme idea. I think the title, I think it's in my intro. Move Forward is the actual name of the SEND programme that we delivered through the SIB. It was 5 years, LCF partnership. Big Issue Invest were our investor, and our commissioner, the organisation that I talked about earlier. They became the commissioner of that programme, and that's the DFN Foundation. So that essentially kind of set us off on our partnership, and that launched just before I joined the organisation. So all of the kind of early work that was done resulted in the decision to go with that. In terms of the need that we were trying to address, essentially, I mean, it's really difficult to get data which is very specific around the 15 to 25 or the 18 to 25 market. But young people with special educational needs, or certainly adults with learning disabilities, I think the rate is running, it hovers between 4.8% and 5.1% of employment. That's a shockingly low employment rate. So essentially, as far as we're concerned, there is an absolute continuing need to target that particular group. We also know that 25% of employers have no experience of hiring younger workers who face one or more disadvantages, such as physical or mental conditions. And we also know that employment rates for people with autism or learning disability are even further lower than for people with any other form of disability. So essentially, the program that we were trying to construct and design was particularly geared around employment. Now, that's a much harder edged outcome than on our mainstream programs, which is working with young people in schools. So essentially, the thing that we're testing out is, what does a coach supporting a SEND young person from transition from education into employment, does that create the conditions or improve the conditions for that young person actually securing employment post progression? In terms of the program we ran over 5 years, I'm sorry to mention the pandemic, but on an outcomes-based contract, which is employment, 2 years of a pandemic was pretty much the worst thing that could possibly have happened to us during those 5 years. So I cannot tell you how challenging those 2 years were. We had an incredible amount of support from LCF in particular, but it did create real challenges with our commissioner, who was incredibly frustrated and felt that we really needed to get going and get motoring, but actually employment was incredibly challenging for young people, especially for our young people who might be presenting with additional health needs and therefore we needed to take extra care of. And I think the other thing about the pandemic was that for those young people who weren't in the workplace and they weren't actually in school, that really did set back their development. They had been isolated socially, and essentially for some of our young people, we went back to zero essentially once we came out of the pandemic. So it was an incredibly challenging environment to deliver an outcomes-based contract, but we worked our way through it. At the end of the contract, which was last March, we're just about to publish the evaluation report. We worked out that we had supported young people through an average of 3.7 key transition points towards employment. Now that's incredible. That's an incredible amount of transition. Transition is difficult, challenging, stressful for the average young person. For a young person presenting with special educational needs, those transitions are even more stark in terms of the things that they need to overcome to make those a successful move. The final figure was, I think, about 80% of our young people who were ready for employment, because there were still some young people on the programme at the end of the programme. 80% is the figure of employment that we've reached, transitioning into employment or educational training. Employment was most of the rate. We have to count supported internships as education or training because essentially they're not yet employed. But actually the movement of young people through the supported internship model is usually highly successful. So many of those will have successfully achieved. I think we worked out that it was about 12 million social value. So £3.22 of social value was created for every pound invested. So we did some analysis around return on investment for our commissioner. We talked a lot about sustainability. That's been a significant challenge for us. I would also say that particularly for this model where we didn't have a systems commissioner and a systems operator wasn't close to the project, and I think that made the sustainability thing actually much more challenging, because effectively you have to, not only do you have to say, look, we do this and it works really well, you've actually got to raise your profile and so on. And if you're a very small operator and you're a small charity or a small delivery partner, that can be really, really challenging. However, that said, we have been commissioned. It's an adapted program. I think one of the most significant things you'll notice about the new program is it's not delivered in schools. They are way too far from the labour market, and the school system, we believe, needs a different type of program to support young people's the development of employability. So our adapted program is actually community based. It's commissioned. We've got 3 big commissions. One is the Mayor of London, GLA, and that's the Propel bid. Hounslow Local Authority have commissioned us separately to deliver a very similar programme, and we're also delivering in the West Midlands for Birmingham. So the kind of commissioning piece is an ongoing challenge for us. And I think it also, SkillMill spoke about, you know, we don't want to lose that team and we don't want to lose their expertise. So we've been really working hard to make sure that we retain them. That's it.
Thank you so much, Ashley, for that. And I think maybe what's worth me briefly highlighting, for those of you who may not have picked up on it in the video, we've just heard from 4 brilliant projects. They're actually one of 29 projects for the Life Chances Fund, a number of which are also in the room or here at the conference. And these 29 projects are part of a much wider network that has enabled all of this incredible work to happen. That includes the team in government, the DCMS. That is included clearly at the local level, local government commissioner, service providers, a whole variety of intermediaries. So I want to pause very briefly just to invite anyone who's involved with the Life Chances Fund, whether as a project, whether as the National Lottery Community Fund, whether as central government, just to raise your hand, whether you're online or in the room, because I would love afterwards for people to be able to come to you and continue the conversation as well as with our panelists. So this is your invitation now to raise your hand, including online. There's a raise hand function. Great. Yeah, so we've got a massive number of people in the room. Online, we've got 1 hand raised. I'm pretty sure there's a few more online if you're feeling brave. Yeah, even more, great. So please do have a look around and chat to one another and go and ask them about their experiences too. I'm mindful of time. I said it was a short session. We've only got an hour, and I have a number of juicy questions I wanted to ask. But I'm going to do the selfless thing, and I'm going to actually open up questions to the room first instead. So we will start with in person. If anyone has questions, please raise your hand and we will come to you. And online, pop them in the chat and then we will have a look. Great, I've got one over here and one back here. Let's start with those 2 and then I see you over there. Over here first. Sorry, Andrea, I'm making you run. Okay.
Thank you.
It just wasn't on.
This is Shafak Müderiski. So my question is actually about the measuring and monitoring mechanism of social outcomes. I wonder how you put the distinction between outputs and outcomes, because I was, you know, we were following the slides for stronger families, and you were talking about evidenced outcomes like number of families approached or the cost of the whole program. But when we are talking about outcomes, it's about what the change we have created in those beneficiaries' lives and the stakeholders as well. So how do you measure it? How do you monitor it?
Great, thank you. And then we had one other question that I'll take now as well that was here. We have got a microphone coming to you. Sorry, I'm making Andrea do a lot of work today.
On top of the running this morning.
On top of, yes, she did the run at 7 a.m. as well.
Hi, I'm Sue Ormiston from the National Lottery Community Fund. Mine was more of a comment than a question, because I just wanted to say that we're involved in the programme, as you just said, Jess, and we distribute the funding on behalf of the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. We oversee the management of the programme, we report back, and during the conference, we've talked a lot about the ideological concept of social outcomes partnerships, the complexities and the challenges. And I just want to say how great it was to hear from the projects, to hear about the outcomes on the ground and the differences they make to people's lives, because that's really what it's all about and why we're all here.
Thank you so much for that, and a lovely encouragement. Great, so I think it'd be wonderful to get to hear from each of you a little bit about what it's been looking like on the ground for outcomes versus outputs, and a little bit about how you measure and monitor that in perhaps a little bit more detail. Faye, you were picked on a little bit there. Are you happy to go first?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So for stronger families, the measurement is care days saved. I have referred to that as the outcome. I think it's a very good indicator that we have 257, I want to say, families that have stayed together or are on track to stay together. So the outcome is the combination of both of those things. The care day saved is the mechanism that allows us to see how it's improving and increasing over time. That is measured, calculated by looking at the families and by seeing what happens to them over a period of time once the intervention has reached a certain stage.
Great, thank you so much for that. And I think what's worth really drawing out there from Faye is this is such an interesting project in Norfolk that's actually a preventative one, and preventative spending and preventative projects are notoriously hard to evidence because it's something that didn't happen. And yet they've managed to find this great intervention of identifying children, families that are on the edge of care and being able to prevent days of care, which and immediately is getting cost savings to the local authority. So it's a really unique case of this, and so I'd encourage you to chat to her more. Davu, outcomes, outputs, measuring.
So we've got 6 outcomes that we measure, and actually capturing the evidence for those outcomes is relatively straightforward. So the first outcome is the young person actually starts the job. So that's a contract that they'll sign with us. So that's number 1. Number 2, they will complete an induction process, lasts about 2 weeks. Third outcome is they'll achieve a qualification. That's an AQA level 2 qualification. And they've got the full 6 months that they're with us to complete that qualification. The fourth outcome is they actually get to the end of the program, which is, as I said, 6 months long. Fifth outcome, they transition out of the skill mill into further employment or training. And so we require a letter from an employer or a college to confirm that they've started that program or that course or that job. And then the final outcome, which is the big one, and each one increases in value as we go forward. So the last one is they haven't been convicted in a court for any further offence within 6 months, well, within 12 months of starting the programme. So that includes 6 months after they finish the programme. And that data is confirmed by the police. So, so all of those outcomes are very easy to evidence. So actually, it's a very complex program, but that's one thing that's not complex is the outcome measurement. The interesting thing for us is that we've finished delivery in March, as I said, and we don't collect the final outcome data until the end of September. We've got 50 young people in the final cohorts who we are waiting to find out have they been reconvicted. And we were obviously very concerned over the last few weeks when there was the unrest and how many of our young people would be drawn into that. And that spike event could have had a really kind of catastrophic impact on the outcomes. We're doing very well, especially around the reconviction rates, but that could have blown it all to bits. I'm actually quite happy to say that none of the young people involved in the programme were arrested as part of that those events, so that's good news. But in terms of outputs, we've got so many more things that we're aware of that we're generating through this programme. I mean, a lot of knowledge, a lot of understanding about the theory of change, which is developing. So, one big thing is the health benefits of the young people are reporting through being involved in this project. Both physical and mental health benefits. And you saw from the video that the young people are generally, outside in contact with nature. And that in itself brings lots of benefits for their mental health. And the physical nature of the work itself is also improving their physical health. Not something that we report on in terms of the Life Chances Fund, but something that we generate a lot of evidence ourselves. We collect case studies, lots of case studies, and we publish those. So if you look on our website or you follow us on social media, you'll see us promoting or showcasing a lot of this work. So those are other outputs. I mean, there's lots and lots of that, but the contract itself is actually quite simple in terms of the outcomes and how they're evidenced.
Great, thank you so much. Joe?
Yes, I'm still jealous of you, Faye, for having one outcome. I really want to work somewhere with that.
Good luck.
So yeah, we think about outcomes really probably in two ways. I mean, the first is measuring positive change. So across whether it's social, emotional, or academic attendance, the sort of each program participant has their own kind of unique set of outcomes, because all of their sort of original risk profiles and profiles are different. We found that's been quite important, actually. I think having outcomes around positive change, I think, are much more meaningful to the children and families, as opposed to just talking about diversion from something horrible that might happen in future. That's the second sort of aspect of the outcomes, though, is that sort of preventative side. And as you said, you know, that's really tough, you know, to evidence, particularly for a sort of a program like ours that is quite upstream in terms of early intervention. You know, some of these kids are in primary school, for example. They're not necessarily, you know, on the edge of, you know, offending or social care or something like that. So, so that's a challenge. I think 2 points I'd probably make. I mean, one of the big challenges we've had is with evaluation, actually, and specifically finding a really robust counterfactual and quality of match, I suppose. And actually, partly that's because, I mean, as I said before, each of our currently 1,700 children and families who are on the programme, we don't think of that as 1,700 people on our programme. That's 1,700 different programmes, ultimately. The collection of, you know, intervention and programme diet, if you like, over the 2 years is different. So that's, you know, that's really challenging. And I suppose any person-centered model, the more sort of tailored, I suppose, it is, and the more you really you're successful in finding the people who most need it, the harder it is to find someone else who is of a really similar profile and to track them, really. So, I mean, we're still wrestling with challenges around evaluation. I mean, like you said, Davey, I mean, we have sort of different sort of collections of qualitative, you know, lots of case studies, lots of testimonials, lots on the sort of quant side as well, but very much sort of still learning on that. Yeah.
Thank you. And Ashley, let's go to you.
Yeah, lots of similarities, particularly with SkillMill in terms of our outcomes being quite hard-edged in terms of a job, work readiness activities, and qualifications. So very strong similarities there. In terms of, but lots of also similarities around the evaluation piece, because essentially the hard outcome that we are judged against by our commissioner is a full-time sustained job, sustained over 3 months. However, for a number of our young people, success looked like part-time employment, because that fitted with their life, their health conditions, and any other challenges that they had in their life. So we've got a real conundrum around, was that a success for the young person? Can we count it meaningfully? Or does the commissioner get to define what success looks like? So we've got some similar evaluation challenges.
Thanks so much for that. Great. I know that we had a question back here, and then I'm keen to see if we've got any.
We have a juicy one in the chat.
Excellent. Let's hear this one, and then also,
am I going to Chi-Hung?
To the left, but we'll take Chi-Hung's as well, as long as they're all quick questions. Do you both promise they're quick questions?
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, hi, I'm Yvonne from the Singapore Ministry of Social and Family Development. I wanted to ask, for such a fund, do you see the greatest value in testing out new approaches at a hyper-local level, versus would such a fund also similarly be useful for scaling or, you know, running a very standardized, replicable program across multiple locations?
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Chi-Hung?
Thanks. I need to declare that I support the Life Chances Fund. So there's a vested interest there. I've been supporting it independently. My question is a naughty question because people have been talking about sustainability, right? So my question is, what's a good exit when you entered into the SIP, when you entered into the Outcomes Fund? What were your expectations of how you were going to exit the SIP? and the fund, because that influences how people think of sustainability and success. So are we sustaining the intervention or parts of the intervention? Are we sustaining the delivery partners? Do we think we need to do another similar project or a SIP or an outcomes fund? So I think those different conceptualizations really, bleed into what do we mean by sustaining? What are we sustaining? What is a good exit?
Thank you. And then Andrea, online.
Okay, well, it's linked to the sustainability point that Chi Hung made, and it's a question that asks whether any research has been done on the external implications of 29 major projects that all need sustainable funding. So in other words, are we capturing with our research the sort of sustainability or lack of sustainability of these projects? I think it's a really interesting point. I think many of you in the room know that the GoLab is the learning and evaluation partner on the Life Chances Fund. And we've been asking these questions around sustainability for a number of years. Mara has been going on about start with the exit strategy ever since I met her in 2016. And it is a really interesting point, and it's obviously, but James from DCMS is here too, so James, feel free to chip in into the discussion. I think we recognize the importance of this question, but we also recognize how difficult it is from a research perspective to answer them. And, ideally, to be able to answer this question meaningfully, you need to be able to track these projects and the organizations involved. Again, what level of sustainability are we tracking for a while beyond the life of the Life Chances Fund, right? And then where do you draw the line with that? And then what's the appetite of the people involved to sort of continue to work with researchers, 6 months, 12 months, 24 months further down the line? I think for some of the Life Chances Fund projects that ended sort of earlier, I think it's fair to say it's already been a bit difficult to get project stakeholders who, move on with their lives to answer our surveys and so on. And Francie, who's in the room and leads a lot of our primary evaluation work, you can chat to her more about that. But I think it's also ironic that we have this question about research when we literally have 90% of the GoLab researchers in the other session happening at the moment, which is all dedicated to researchers. But it's great that this is being discussed. James, do you want to jump in on this?
We're very short on time, so I'm going to, instead of, sorry, James, letting you come in at this point. We've got 5 minutes left of the session, so there's definitely not.
I was overruled, James. I'm sorry.
That was very harsh. I've done all my selflessness already. Great, so we only have, I want a 1-sentence-ish answer. This is very harsh of me, from each of you. You can pick on which of those questions you'd like to pick up if you feel like you've got something especially to say. So we had something about replicability and scalability. I don't know if, Davey, you might be interested in mentioning about SkillMill's experience of working some different places. There's also a question about what were your exit expectations as you joined the Life Chances Fund, so the sustainability question. And then your appetite for continued participation with GoLab's research for sustainability. Those are the 3 points. And the one thing I would say just on the first question, Yvonne, you're speaking from the Singaporean context. So I realise we have quite different global contexts in the room, and that's really interesting. One thing that's probably worth noting about the UK context is, especially with the new government administration, this refreshed push towards what to look like engaging at a local level. We've seen that also in the previous administration, but I feel like it's come back on the cards yet again. And something that has seemed to be especially great about the Life Chances Fund was that it wasn't just a generic rollout of one programme across a whole country. It was instead quite the opposite, which you may be then surprised by that's a good thing. But actually it had allowed for central accountability, but with locally defined outcomes with local issues. We see quite different demographics, quite different issues happening all across our country. The Northeast is facing wildly different problems to London, which is facing wildly different problems to the Midlands. So I think that's something that's been especially good about it, has been actually more of this local level aspect where you might want to fund in a different context, do something more that's about replicability. Who would like to go first on a question? Davey? Great.
I think I'm going to try.
1-sentence answer, sorry.
Try and answer all 3 questions at once, one answer. So the local question is really good because we've got, different geographies, and that was one of the things which really attracted investors to our work, that it was actually testing in different places. So the local flavour is really important. It's locally driven sort of stuff. So every program does, feels a bit different. The young people, you could probably, if you lined them all up, they look pretty much the same, whether they're from West Sussex or Newcastle or Durham, but the delivery is quite different based on the location. All of those local authorities did not go into the SIB thinking, what's going to happen in 4 years? I think if we went into a contract again, we would be thinking about what is going to happen next and building that in terms of the capacity, because we got to the end of the program, it looked a lot like at the start. And the evaluation for us is been really, really key. And we've been feeding a lot in around, to the evaluation around the bigger structural things, not just the smaller kind of learnings. It's like the big stuff as well.
Thank you so much. Ashley, how do you feel about us popping online to you?
My big thing is around the sustainability piece, and I think the question around what was your exit strategy is a fantastic one, because I don't think there was any discussion around exit, and I feel really strongly about it because we sat outside of the system, and actually mandating those discussions in the governance structure and the way in which the governance of the programme worked would have forced us to engage with the system much earlier than we did. So I feel really strongly about that, and I also feel strongly that it would have been lovely to have the opportunity to work really closely with evaluators, etc., all through the programme and beyond. And I know that we have engaged at points, but not to the extent to which we would have welcomed. So again, I've got a real thing about the sustainability piece that I think we're really missing a trick on the way in which we mandate and structure the launch of these programmes, because we're not thinking about what comes next. And we're also not thinking about what comes next if you're launching and you continue to sustain, but actually your programme's not working. Who's overseeing that? So yeah, there's some real issues around the sustainability piece for me.
Thank you so much, Ashley, and a challenge there. Joe?
I mean, similar. I can't remember doing too much thinking about what was going to happen at the end of 5 years when the LCF launched. I think sustaining the service, of course. I mean, particularly for when you're so locally focused. Actually, one of the more we now really trying to understand. Actually, one of the more systemic outcomes really is about really increasing the levels of trust in the local community in working with services. And we've got lots of sort of anecdotal evidence at this point. We're seeking to understand better that's really taken place in some of the communities where we've got really deep penetration in terms of working in the primary and secondary schools for a long time. So I think that's probably a learning for us, really, that there were outcomes in the rate card on the Life Chances Fund and in our outcomes contracts, but actually, there's probably a wider set of more sort of systemic outcomes, really, that I wish we'd have sort of started to look at and think about sort of capturing a little bit earlier, really. I think that would have helped with, the sustainability question as well.
Thanks. Faye?
A good exit we won't be thinking about for a little while yet.
Had some good news recently, no?
Yes, yeah, the contract has been extended. I'm going to go back to one of the quotes in our slides in terms of replication. If you were to replicate our programme, I would say carry out a needs analysis first, identify the local context, who the partners would be, what complexities you might face there, to see whether it suits that local environment and replication. And in terms of further research and contributing, we will be around for a little while, so I'm sure conversations can be had.
Brilliant. Okay, so we are more or less at time, but I am, as ever, an engagement person. So I really care about us ending with something practical and clear. We've heard some great pieces of advice and of experience throughout this session, but I am going to be asking each of my panelists and James, so that he gets a moment to share as well, for very, very, very shortly, because we are technically at time, one piece of practical advice you'd give to practitioners, because I know we have a lot of practitioners in the room doing this sort of work, and one recommendation you'd give to policymakers, because I know there are a lot of people who are doing policymaking or engaging with policymakers here off the back of your experience. Ashley, are you happy for us to go to you first for those two short bits of advice?
I think for policymakers, I think there's all of the stuff that we've talked about around sustainability. I think there needs to be some careful thought around what that looks like, clearer guidance, more robust support for projects, etc., and reflections on what works. What are the conditions by which you would deliver something or structure something? And right from the beginning, you're considering what that endpoint looks like. Something in that area, I think. And for practitioners, I would say, I mean, it was a very particular time, the pandemic, but it was quite isolating at times, and we weren't necessarily networked into other projects to the extent that we should have been and could have been. So my advice for any organizations delivering on these types of projects, actually reach out and network with others and potentially come together around what excellence looks like, what benchmarking looks like, and so on, so that we can be a bit of a support to each other.
Thank you. Joe?
I think to policymakers, I think all of the fantastic interventions and programs we've heard, nothing can happen without additional resources in the system. And so I'd really testify to the sort of power of this sort of commissioning, really, to leverage either additional money through philanthropy or pooled funding from the different parts of the sort of fragmented kind of ecosystem. So that would be my first one. To practitioners, I think that the word commissioner can mean a lot of things. I mean, Faye, obviously, of course, you know exactly what it means. But I think for us, there's so many different levels within local authorities. You know, there's sort of councillors who hold purse strings. There's people in the commissioning teams. There's directors of children's services. There's heads of early help, operational people. All thinking about all of those people as commissioners and really investing in your sort of relationship management infrastructure is something we probably should have done earlier, I think, frankly.
Davey?
Advice to practitioners would be to do what we didn't do, which is talk to people who have done it already. And we could have, actually, we didn't think to do that. But I guess now it's a little bit easier because there's a lot more evidence or evidence base of people to go and talk to, whether they're providing a service, commissioning a service, or investing in a service. So there's lots of people to go and talk to and learn from. Advice to policymakers, the thing that frustrates me most, well, a lot, is the effort that goes into finding out what works. And for decades, there's been huge effort trying to find out what works. And we've got a model which works, and it has been tested, not just over 10 years, but it's been tested through the SIB as well. As you said, Jess, there's a lot of love for what we do. But actually, you can't convert love into budget commitment. So actually finding out what works and then investing in it is what is needed, not just more, let's look to see what works going on out there.
Not more innovations, just for the sake of it.
Exactly.
Hey.
Mine expands on Davey's advice to practitioners. He said to look outwards. I would say think about communication looking inwards. For our service, we have to have communication across the service provider, the social workers in all of the localities, the team managers, commissioning, finance, procurement, legal. Within each of the other organisations, they've got communication going up through their structures and around their structures, I'm very sure, to ensure the delivery of this contract. So you have to think about both aspects, the external communication, what you can learn, and also how you're going to feed that in and around the organisation to ensure there is awareness and buy-in to this, to ensure delivery happens. Policy advice, with my local government hat on, I'm handing it over to somebody else in the partnership. Liz is just sitting behind you.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Hi, I'm Liz Wollahan from Bridges Outcomes Partnerships, and Faye asked me to chip in on this point. So from our perspective, some advice to policy or ask of policymakers would be to build on and improve from a lot of these learnings that have come about from the Life Chances Fund, being even bolder and creating an additional resources through a Mission Outcomes Fund, which would bring together funding from across government departments, creating long-term, holistic, and preventative interventions and learning on all of this great work that we've heard from today.
Thank you. And then the final person I will let share their 2 bits of advice, James. And for those of you who don't know, James, hopefully you saw him yesterday if you were here, but if you haven't seen him yet today, James heads up the team who oversees the Life Chances Fund in government.
Do you want me to give exactly the same advice?
No, as you feel able.
As I feel able, okay. Advice to myself. No, I think for policymakers, be careful what you wish for. I think there is a, we deliberately obviously set out the Life Chances Fund to be a long-term fund. And I do remember at the very beginning, the point around sustainability was made quite large, but it was a long time ago. And so fair enough, I think that reminder point is really important along the way. Obviously, the COVID pandemic didn't help. That meant that we were kind of going through a period where perhaps we would have put our mind to other things, but that's not an excuse in itself. Obviously, we provided financial assistance to projects over the last year to help with the capacity building around transitions. So it's not as if we've kind of walked into it blindly. But I do think that is something that policymakers really need to consider with projects like this. What are the additional measures you need to put into place to support programs as they transition out? For practitioners, I mean, look, these guys know better than me and they can give better advice to each other on this stuff. I think it is difficult. Any kind of government funding is always going to face this problem of budgetary cycles and the political events that surround those, which frankly do tie the hands of the way that we have to operate in government to some extent. So be aware of that, I think is probably the thing to say to practitioners. It won't always be as simple as continuation funding after a project ends.
Thank you. I hope what you guys have been able to get from this session is we can learn so much from one another and not just reinvent the wheel. And together we can be greater than the sum of our individual parts. So I'd encourage you to keep learning from this, whether you're in the midst of it, if you're thinking of starting it out, if you're just somewhere in the sphere connecting more tangentially. We're going to have all of these posters out next with different projects. Go have a look, go talk to the people who are here in person in Oxford. And online, we'll be putting those posters online too. Dive deep into our Knowledge Hub. We have case studies on so many of these projects. We have the actual outcomes. We have what's been achieved. We have all sorts of information and videos and all sorts. So have a look. We've deliberately made it all available because we care about not just keeping all of this knowledge and power to ourselves, but actually sharing it. And finally, we've got an Engaging with Evidence webinar, which I'll be moderating next month. And that's going to be looking at the Life Chances Fund learnings as well as the CBO's learnings. Neil is in the room with us who will be speaking on that, so about CBO. And we will also be talking a bit more about this brand new publication that we launched yesterday. Thank you so much for joining for our whistle stop tour. Sorry for running over. Lunch now. So